Hi, I'm Joel Ziff, and I'm a psychologist and also a CSAT supervisor. And I've been in practice for more than 35 years in the Boston area. I can be contacted at my website, www.ziffgroup.com. And I'm here today to speak with you about the topic of how to empower sex addicts to respond more constructively to their distressed spouses. So for the distressed spouse, in the beginning especially, they are having a lot of trauma as a result of the discovery. They may be they may be shaming the addict, they may be blaming themselves, they may be unable to function, they may be overwhelmed with sadness, they may feel humiliated, they may have a lot of fear or anxiety. They may desperately be wanting reassurance. They may be in a panic mode. They may be seeking the truth, suspicious, doing detective work, trying to micromanage to make sure that the addict is not acting out. There may be tremendous rage and anger, and there may be a lot of chaos and instability. And oftentimes, for the addict who's newly in recovery, often maybe feeling some relief at their being able to finally be living an honest life. It's often overwhelming for them. And a lot of the time for the addict, the responses are terrible. So when the spouse is very upset and angry, the addict may be saying, you know, I've changed, time is different, I'll never cheat on you again, I love you. And the spouse doesn't respond well with that because they don't trust the person's words because they've lied so much. If they have showed up late at home and the spouse is suspicious, they may give a lot of apologies and say there was a lot of traffic, but again, they're not being believed because they've been dishonest. Or if the spouse is very angry, the addict may just say, stop screaming at me, or they may collapse into shame and feel so bad. All of these things often only exacerbate the spouse's reactions. The distressed spouse is having a lot of pain. A lot of it is due to the immediate reaction to the discovery of the addict's behaviors. It's the partner's trauma. And a lot of it may also go back to the spouse's own history of childhood and adult trauma, neglect, other issues. So the distressed spouse needs the addict to do several things. First of all, the addict has to work to maintain sobriety and a recovery program. They have to seek a cohort of peers with whom they can get support. If they're distressed, instead of dumping that distress on their spouse, they need to be able to turn to peers and a therapist. They have to stop lying. They have to respect the spouse's boundaries. If she wants the addict to move out or to not contact her, he's got to be able to listen to that. The addict needs to step up to be as transparent and accountable as possible to help rebuild trust. If the spouse wants to have a GPS on the person's phone to see where they are, if they want access to email, passwords to financial accounts, the addict needs to do whatever is possible. It's also important for the addict to have an understanding about the partner's trauma and to be able to not take it personally. They can take it personally in the sense of being accountable, but they have to have patience with the fact that the spouse is enraged and in pain and terrified. The addict needs to be able to take ownership and show remorse. And so if the spouse is suspicious, the addict needs to be able to say, even if they hadn't done something, to say, I can understand why you're suspicious that I arrived home late, because even though I'm telling you it's traffic, in the past I've lied to you, and I understand why you might not trust me now. There has to be a communication of understanding and empathy and validation of the spouse's trauma. The spouse needs from the addict evidence of sincere recovery and has to, over time, show trustworthy behavior. The addict needs to step up to assume adult responsibilities, to help with household duties, to be present with children in ways that the spouse feels supported. The addict needs to be able to show interest in the experience of the spouse and to put forth extra effort, to ask, how are you feeling today? If you want to talk to me, I want to hear it. And at the same time, the addict needs to be able to respect his own internal and external boundaries. What that means is that it's going to be understandable if your spouse is raging at you, that you might feel defensive or you might feel shame. And if you recognize that, you need to be able to recognize it in yourself, to take a breath and to go for help. And at times, if your addict is not able to respond well to the spouse, to take a time out and do it in a constructive way, not getting in the last word, not blaming the spouse for raging, but just saying, I'm not able to respond well to you. What that means is that the clinicians need to work both to be present with the addict, to give space for the addict to speak up about the difficulty of responding to the spouse, needs empathy for the addict's pain, and to be patient with the addict as the addict is learning how to relate in a different way. The clinician also has to be a role model and demonstrate healthy boundaries themselves in order for the addict to learn. Sometimes that means psychoeducation about addiction, about partner trauma, about recovery. Sometimes it means guidance to the person to get their baseline of recovery and be living in consultation with others. Sometimes it's help with managing affect. If the addict is distressed, to have them have skills for calming themselves. There needs to be help with relationship skills and to challenge the addict around distorted beliefs. It's also the clinician has to be able to hold the addict accountable if the addict is doing things that are destructive. And there has to be creative problem solving about how the addict can keep in balance and be present with the spouse. And oftentimes this requires collaboration with the clinical team because the individual therapist may not always be listening, hearing from the addict all the details of what's going on. So if there's communication with the other therapist involved with the couple and with the spouse, it can be very helpful to get an accurate sense of what's going on. There's a variety of modalities that can be used, embodied modalities, working with psychodrama, role-playing, or active imagination, dealing with childhood trauma. Sometimes it needs social learning, specific step-by-step behavioral guidance with a lot of repetition. When there's narcissism, there's limited capacity for the addict to respond, and that requires ongoing nurturing, support, and guidance. And when there's borderline personality disorder, there needs to be reality therapy, challenge, logical consequences, and limits. If the addict does not follow through with therapeutic recommendations, the clinician needs to understand the addict's resistance and try to use that understanding to work with and resolve the addict's underlying distortions and fears. What the clinician cannot do is control the addict, control the spouse, not make decisions for the addict, and not fix the relationship. But what the clinician can do is be present with the addict as the addict is learning. And sometimes that takes a lot of time and is very slow and requires repetition. And so the clinician needs to deal with his or her own impatience and distress to be witnessing the difficulties that are going on.